Good evening, everyone. We're back again for installment number 15 of our class series on the subject of Revelations, a guidepost through time. It's been quite a journey, but we've got a long way to go. We'll have some very interesting things tonight, I think, to talk about, and some pictures to show you concerning those things. But first, let's go ahead and open with prayer, and I ask Brother Jesse to come up and give a word of prayer.
Almighty God, we come before you once again to thank you for remembering us with life today and all the things to sustain it. Especially now, we thank you for this time that we can put things aside and listen to your word and to learn about things that have passed in your servants' lives and things that are to come in ours. I ask you please help us to work to be ready when your Son returns and not to be surprised as those who are unawares. Please be with those who are not with us in sickness and suffering of some kind. In Jesus' name we pray and thank you. Amen.
Okay, thank you, Brother Jesse. It was once again good to have everybody here, and especially those abroad and listening who might even be in other parts of the world. It's so good to share the Scriptures with you and hear each other's thoughts on them, and to be connected with so many so far away, so instantly. So, well, let's pick up with, again, our traditional review. We'll cover a few slides here to get our speed back up. And I promise you some very interesting things tonight that might be very compelling, because we're going to start to get into some of these creatures and these beasts. For the next couple of weeks, we will be very much involved with these imagery that I'm about to show you tonight. So last week, we got into chapter 12. We won't read it again. We may read the last portion of it a little later on if we get that far. But this is a chapter of much controversy with how much of how Christianity really understands a lot of the sayings that are in it, that they, I feel, take out of context. And one is that in this chapter we find that the devil is as a fallen angel. That's one place where that's drawn onto. Also, that the child that is born to this woman is Christ, is one of the understandings that many people seem to have that I hope to show you tonight is not so. And also the well-known phrase of "there was war in heaven," and it is believed that there literally was war in God's dwelling place of angels, and especially one angel in particular that rebelled and he was cast out of heaven, and that is drawn from Revelations. Well, I hope tonight to show you how that really doesn't fit, and we'll get there here shortly. As we talked about the last couple of weeks ago, we went over getting up through the massacre of St. Bartholomew, came on up through the 1600s and 1700s, right at the opening of the French Revolution. Well, in chapter 12, we now go back through time. The telescope is being opened up again to look at another theme that is running parallel with everything that we've already talked about. We start now moving towards the time of the vials being poured out, which will still be a little ways down the road yet, by probably a couple of weeks. And real quickly, we went back in chapter 12 to the sixth seal period. And chapter 12 will start to reveal how the church starts to transform into the great harlot system, and that the symbols of the sun, moon, and stars are now associated with her. And this is so critical that you see this, because you can see how it cannot be the bride of Christ, but it is the bride of I believe, false Christianity, so to speak. Real quickly, we're not going to cover it in the detail we did last week, but just to get our heads back into it, it says, and as the chapter opened, there was a great wonder in heaven, and he saw a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And you remember, it was the sun that went black, the moon that went blood red, and the stars that fell from heaven. She's now wearing or standing on all of these elements. They're now around her. It's interesting that she has absorbed these things. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered. So she's at some point to where something is about to come on the scene. A child is about to be born. And we're going to look at what that child is in detail tonight. We'll really get into that. And at the same time we were seeing all this, it says, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon. And this is the first place where he comes on the scene. And this is going to be interesting to follow this dragon system through the ages and through the centuries. It doesn't happen all at once. And he had 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. We talked about last week what all of those were, but we'll get back to it as we go through this. And his tail drew a third part of the stars of heaven and did cast them to the earth. Of course, we talked about the different emperors that were in power. And that applied to Maximinus, who threw out of power all those who would not support him in keeping paganism alive and fighting Constantine. If you missed all that, please go back and watch the video from last week, the 14th class, and it'll explain it all to you. I don't want to take the time to get back into it again. And it says, and the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. So John is looking at a very intense moment in time of this creature about to destroy this child as soon as she gives it. You imagine the intensity of witnessing this creature interacting with her. As we said before, he didn't probably see a still picture like we have to look at today. He saw these things were moving and looked real to him. So we can't even begin to understand what he really experienced. It says she was travailing in birth in pain to be delivered. And we talked about how she was pregnant with the seeds of error. And that error was Constantine. And what I may have skipped over real quickly, she, being the woman, she represented the church. But if the bride of Christ is to be a virgin, why is she pregnant? Unless she has fornicated herself in some way. And that's what has happened. This is a virgin who has committed fornication with another thing, and that is Constantine. The dragon had 7 crowns, and we had to go to Revelation 17:10 to get a better idea about what that was referring to. And it said there were 7 kings. 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And we looked about in time where there had been 5 different orders of Roman government. There was the one that is, which is the one John was living in, and there was another one to come, which became that Gothic, when the Goths and the barbarians came later. Also, he had 10 horns on his head. And the 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings. Now, this is, again, we've jumped to chapter 17 to get these explanations, which have received no kingdom as yet. That means they don't exist yet. It's something that's coming in the future. But receive power as kings for 1 hour with the beast. This is actually a time capsule of things yet to unfold. And when you understand these creatures as time capsules, it's not something that happened in a moment or a few decades or maybe just inside of a century. This is a long, hundreds of years compressed timeline. And once you understand that, it's a lot easier to get what's happening here. And for the first time, John is seeing these things that it's alluding to things that are coming in the future. And we talked about at this time, when this woman was pregnant with the seeds of error, Constantine ruled in the west, and it was the Eastern Third that wanted to destroy Christianity that Constantine used to rise to power. Now, Brother Gerald suggested possibly that I bring up a map to show how this was. So I've added this week to show you before Constantine took over, but when he became emperor after his father, he ruled that area in the yellow there, which was Spain and Gaul, which is France, and up into Britain. That was his area that his father ruled, and he took over. Licentiousness, I believe it is, he ruled in the middle part of it, which was Illyricum. That's not written on this map, but this fits pretty well with that center area that he ruled. And Maximinus, or in some places he's called Maximinus, he ruled the eastern part, the far east, over there where Turkey and, of course, Palestine and Libya and Egypt and all are. And all of these guys wanted the power for themselves. Well, Constantine was riding on the back of Christianity to power. Maximinus wouldn't have anything to do with it, and licentiousness hated Maximinus, so he sided with Constantine temporarily. A third of the stars, I mentioned that earlier, was what Maximinus threw down. He was the tail of the dragon, throwing down all of the opposition in his area that wanted to be in Christianity, and he wanted to keep paganism alive. So Constantine ruled in the west, Licinius ruled in Illyricum, and tolerated it briefly, but he was a pagan himself. And Maximin in the east, and he wanted to destroy Christianity, and he is that part that wants to devour that child as soon as it is born, the pagan part of the dragon, to devour it as soon as it is born. What was about to happen here was the birth of a political and religious system that would grow from this point on until the return of Christ. For a while, the woman becomes part of this creature, and then in Napoleon's time, she's thrown out and becomes separate. But later on, through the last century and a half that we are very familiar with, she climbs back. No longer is she part of the creature, but she now rides the creature in our day. And that's what we'll see by the time we get to chapter 17. So many years are passing here. So this brings us to where we are tonight. This is where we left off, about this child that's being born. We kind of covered all the components, try to understand what is John looking at here, what is trying to be relayed to us is about to happen. Now, let's see how it starts to unfold, all of these components, how they interact, what happens, how is the story going to progress beyond this moment in time that John is witnessing. All right, in verse 5 of chapter 12, it said, she gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Now, I had to admit myself, when I first read this, it sounds like it's talking about Christ. Sounds like. And to mainstream Christianity, this sounds just like the birth and the ascension of Christ. And many people believe that is exactly what it's referring to. Well, what does Revelations 1:1 tell us? When we first open the book, the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him to show unto his servants the things which must shortly come to pass. And this was given to Christ to give to John. So here's something to consider. If this really is to think about, it's a reasoning. If this is referring to Christ and a prophecy of his birth and being caught up to heaven and ruling with a rod, Jesus is approximately 96 years old right now. If you think, many times we don't think about Christ being older than 33 years old. He's coming up on 100 years old. Why would he be prophesying his birth? Prophecy is something in the future. So it's got to be something else. It's just the reasoning there. Caught up to God and his throne. And I'm going to suggest to you, and we have to look at this closely and think about it. It takes a while to really get your head wrapped around it. But I'm going to suggest to you that this is Constantine that's being born and everything that he brings to the table of Christianity. Christianity, so-called, brought Constantine to political birth. He ruled part of the Roman Empire, but on the back of Christianity, he swept across and just wiped out the other two emperors, and paganism fell, as we're going to see. Now you might say, well, how can you say that? It says he was caught up to God and to heaven. Well, we've already seen this wording twice. And that shows there's a pattern of how the Bible speaks. Let's go back just 2 classes. We remember the 2 witnesses? What did it say about them? It says, and they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, come up hither. And they heard a great voice from heaven saying unto them, come up hither. And they ascended up to heaven in a cloud, and their enemies beheld them. And now we talked about the witnesses were caught up into the political heavens. They had been persecuted and all, and they finally got invited to serve in the government. Well, how about the woman that we just read about? If this is the birth of Christ, there's some things here that don't quite fit, and we're very familiar with this because we just read it. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven. So if we're in the literal heavens, it says, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth. Well, what do we know about Christ's birth? Jesus wasn't born in heaven, but this woman is in heaven, about to have a child. Well, we know Christ was born in Bethlehem, here on earth. Mary did not go to heaven to bring birth to Christ and then come back or anything like that. So there's a reasoning in there of how this has to be someone else that was caught up to heaven and ruled with an iron scepter, which means that he ruled in a dictatorship. And, you know, a righteous dictatorship is fine. Christ will rule sort of as a dictator. He will dictate everything and it will be done, but it will be righteous dictation. Here's what we got to think about what were we warned about and what do we have to consider as we look at these things. In Thessalonians, it said, let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there be a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition. This is some of the delusion and the deception that has come into Christianity and caused the separation of the virgin and the harlot that we'll look at tonight. Also in verse 4, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God and that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, we'll get into that as it turns into the papacy, but Constantine got this whole thing started. We're looking at the early part of it, the birth of it. And this thing takes centuries to develop. Centuries, literally. But the process is well underway by this time. In John's day, in Paul's day and all, the seeds were there. But John is seeing how it's going to, in the next couple of centuries, just 200 years later, it starts to accelerate and accelerate faster and faster than it ever did before. Now, it sounds like a wonderful time because, all the times we've talked about these interspersed visions of glory. This is, what we're reading is not to the glory and honor of Yahweh. These verses where it says, caught up to God and to heaven and all. This is not to the glory and honor of Yahweh. It is not an interspersed vision of glory. This is very important that you see this because it's not coming at the time when the interspersed visions normally come. The true visions of glory come at the end of the seals, the trumpets, and the vials. We've been looking at that pattern as they unfold. When you get to the end, then the 24 elders always fall down. There's always some big thing and the people singing and things of that nature. Well, that's not happening here. It's just this phrase as if someone has been born and gone to heaven and is ruling. I must tell you again that this is what I believe it to be. It says he will rule all nations with a rod of iron. And he was never resisted. Once he came into power, he may have held skirmishes with barbarians, but nobody ever tried to overthrow him. No other nation ever attacked him. He ruled. And Gibbons, who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, says the last 15 years of his reign revealed him as a cruel and dissolute monarch. Now, this is men of history recording what is known about this man just naturally, that he did rule with a rod of iron. So that fits. And there's one of the better historians who studied it who came to that opinion. During this time, and this is critical that this is understood right now, as we go into this, because it can be very ambiguous if you just glaze over it. I'll do the best I can because I don't want to get beyond really skipping like a stone, because we can get very deep into different things. And I've tried my best to keep it simple, but just to let you see that there is a pattern of what I'm talking about. During this times, those who would not take part in the Catholic Church are being filtered out of the false Christianity that is now rising into power. And these years from the 300s, 400s, 500s, there's imagine them just being run, they're all being run through the filters of where they're going to take their stand. Because there was a vacuum of power when Constantine came in, and religious rulers with all their different opinions were wanting that position. And so there was a lot, that's why the whole thing, when Jesus became God, was written. And all the controversy that took place, that Constantine's reign was just pilfered with controversy over which Christian order, direction would take the seat next to him, and which one would he side with. And that's a little bit of what we'll look at tonight. Here's what I suggest to you that you're seeing. The true virgin woman is about to separate and flee from the now prostituted woman who will eventually sit on the back of the beast in Revelation 17. You think about that. These next couple of centuries, we're going to end up with what I suggest is two women. The true virgin and the prostituted woman, where before they're intermingled. They're intermingled, and that separation is taking place during this time. It is while she is in this mixed state that these events are taking place. In John's day, he warned that the Antichrist was already amongst them. Already amongst them. We know the verse very well. He says, "And every spirit that confesses not that Jesus Christ is come into the flesh is not of God. And this is that spirit of Antichrist, whereof ye have heard that it should come, and even now already is in the world." And that whole thing about Christ coming in the flesh and whether he did or not, that was what a lot of that controversy is about, and filtering out who Constantine's side would take in that Arian controversy that took place. So let's move forward. I hope that explains it enough just to give you an idea of the direction we're going in. In verse 6, "And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there for 1,260 days. Now there's the 1,260 days again. Remember, we went through the 1,260 days. Now we're going back to the start of it again about what's happened ecclesiastically. Before we were looking at some military and other things and nations being on who's coming into power, but now we're going to follow this thread through the 1,260 days again. That is my suggestion to you at this time, as far as where I am. Under Constantine, the church became divided, and the true woman was forced to flee from this system. It was coming apart, and they were being divided and separated because a lot of times your life depended on whether you were part of it or not. That's Constantine, was forced to take sides in the controversy that were taking place, and persecuted those who would not conform. He chose to go the Trinitarian route, so to speak, and he made it very hard on those, and it became the law. It was the way it was going to be. So he fell into that part of it. Well, he was the baby being born to the woman who had prostituted herself. So of course he's going to take that route, and that's what that was trying to show us, I believe. Those of the woman that would not be a part of ruling Christianity fled to a safer place and went into the wilderness. Now you can possibly look at it on the front end as an actual place, but it is a more wilderness in the fact it was not in the mainstream body of things. They had to live separate from everything else. And I'm going to go back here just for a second to bring back, you may remember the Donatists that we talked about, because that was part of that ecclesiastical battle that was taking place. Real quick about the Donatists again. I found it fascinating that this is about all we have concerning a movement of people in this direction. There's not a lot recorded, and even the Donatists themselves, there's not a whole lot known about it, so it's the best we have. They were a sect that believed the clergy were traitors and had caved to the persecution, and so were no longer fit to lead the church. They were known for their intense zeal and purity of living and separation from the worldly affiliations. They truly believed that the church was taking a bad direction and was falling into being wooed by Constantine and all of those things, and taking the place of paganism and filling that vacuum and everything that comes with it. And they would have nothing to do with it. That's why they said they were, the clergy had become traitors. In time, I found this little piece of history. In time, all sects of opposition were referred to as Donatists. It almost became a label, in a way. This would have included the true saints of that time. Now, think about this. Brother Roberts said this. It might help explain it. He said it very easily. He said, though these communions in Mass were not the body of Christ, they contained it. In other words, as you had like the Donatists, we probably would have agreed with them on many things and been more in their court than we would have been the Arian controversy and all of that. And they were still being filtered out little by little. This sect goes here, and this sect eventually goes here, and eventually the true bride of Christ, through the hundreds of years, filtered out. But this shows the movement of the brethren who would have been present at these debates and things like that, and trying to decide how they would unfold. Just as the woman contained the Antichrist. Even though she was supposed to be a virgin, a chaste virgin, she had already fornicated and had the Antichrist seeds in her womb, so to speak. So they need to separate. The wilderness possibly would have been an area in North Africa where the Donatists lived in the greatest concentrations. It may have been a place where many went there where there was peace and they didn't get caught up in that. And it's only speculation. We can't really say for sure, because they said there's very little recorded of these people in that time, but it's one of the best things we have to hang on to, are those who fought it and would not be a part of it and get caught and sit in the palaces with Constantine and things like that. So now we're going to move into some more interesting things. And this is going to bring us to this place here, a very well-known phrase, and there was war in heaven. And I'm going to ask if, for the sake of really getting the context, if Brother Jesse would read verses 7 through the end of the chapter again, because things start to change here. We sort of was setting the characters and who they are and what their job was in this. Now we're going to see how they start to do what they're going to do.
And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, the old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. And he was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now is come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God, and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of his testimony, and they loved not their lives unto the death. Therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times and a half a time from the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ.
That last phrase there, to make war with the remnant of her seed who keeps the commandments of Christ. So what we're seeing here is something that is not going to be part of the system. But anyway, we'll get there. I don't know if we'll get to the end tonight or not, but we'll see. Things really sound very exciting here. When you read that, it sounds like a real battle taking place. And it is. But it's happening right here on earth. It's not happening in heaven. This phrase is quoted so much to say that up in God's dwelling place, there was this phenomenal war between these immortal beings, and the one lost out and was kicked out of heaven, as if God couldn't have done that on the front end if that really happened. But you have to understand the nature of angels as we do, and that's another subject. I won't go there right now. What I want to try to do is show what it's really talking about. And I actually found a piece of history we're going to get to here in a little bit where Constantine almost explains it himself, his own words that I found amazing of that very day when this was taking place. So let's go forward and see what it's about. So I brought this up last week, this phrase here. Just, again, it's reasoning for all of you out there who are listening, who may not be familiar with the different theology and thinking. But if the devil was not cast out till after John's day, then who was the snake in the Garden of Eden? There's a reasoning there. So many times the devil was cast out of heaven, made war, but they'll say the snake was the devil too. But yet that happened somewhere about 4,300 years before he was ever kicked out of heaven. There's a reasoning there. Then he hadn't sinned yet. He hadn't fallen. He hadn't fallen from grace for another 4,300 years after creation. Then who's the snake? Who's running the show there? Well, remember it says, by one man sin entered into the world. It doesn't say by one snake sin entered into the world. A very simple understanding. Sin entered the world by man, not by a snake and a fallen angel. It doesn't say that. Okay, Lou and we can really go off on tangents on that one. So let's start breaking this down. There's some interesting phrases here. In verse 7, and there was war in heaven, and Michael, now I'm going to tell you the word Michael I think can be used to apply to different people. And I'm going to show you why I think that, and you do with it as you will. But the word Michael means who like God. Well, Constantine, in the eyes of many people, has fallen into that. And listen what it says, knowing what we know now about paganism fighting against Christianity. And there was war in heaven, the political heaven, and Michael, who I would suggest to you is a reference to Constantine, because when this was written, Constantine wasn't going to be born for 250 years yet. And his angels fought against the dragon, the paganism, and the dragon fought and his angels. Remember Maximinus fighting against Constantine, ready to devour the child? That's the battle it's talking about. And prevailed not, neither was a place found any more in heaven or in the government. Paganism was going down, and Constantine was going to be large and in charge. Well, I would suggest to you here that this is a reference not to an angel named Michael, but a reference to a person who is in this position. And I would suggest to you that Jesus is possibly, and I believe, referred to as Michael in the Scriptures. In Daniel 12:1, and at that time shall Michael stand up. Now this is talking about at the end of times. Michael is going to stand up. The great prince, think about Christ as we go through it, which stands for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble such as never was, since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, and every one that shall be found written in the book of life. Remember, that's what comes out at the end. That we're talking about at Christ's return. Look at the very next verse. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. This is a reference to the resurrection. Well, Michael, the great prince, I would suggest to you, is Christ, one like who comes in the capacity of what God does, because he has all that authority has been laid upon him. It is the same, just as another phrase, I just kind of threw this in this week. It's the same as the just and the unjust being called servants of God. Remember how Nebuchadnezzar was called God's servant? He said, "You are my servant, Nebuchadnezzar." And we know the saints are referred to as servants. There's the just and the unjust are both referred to as servants. Well, the word Michael, I suggest to you, can apply to anyone God raises up for a purpose, whether righteous or unrighteous. All right. Again, let's get back to our war in heaven. Some of these things we have to identify so we know who the characters and the players really are. Because you can see Michael as being an angel that dwells literally in God's place, like Gabriel and so on. I would suggest to you that if you bring it down to a man on earth, it changes the whole scenario. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan. Again, there's another place where confusion comes in, understanding exactly what the devil is and exactly what Satan is, which deceives the whole world. And he was cast out into the earth, not into hell, into the earth. It didn't say he cast him into the bowels of the earth and down in the fiery pits of the abyss of the earth. He was cast into the earth. He's out there walking the planet, and his angels were cast out with him. In other words, all his counselors and advisors and everyone that supported him, they were taken out of their political place. Paganism has been completely overthrown. It hasn't completely ceased to exist, but it no longer sits on the throne. I would suggest to you that that's what it's referring to. Now, in those verses, again, that Brother Jesse just read again, I wanted him read again because it really does sound like the kingdom of God has come and that people are rejoicing. Well, people really did think that. The allusion to false Christianity that Constantine had brought the kingdom. In Revelations 12:10, listen to the words, and you could see the kingdom in it. But with what we've learned, I've shown you, put this in place. He says, "And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven," and I would suggest to you that's the church under Constantine, "Now is come salvation." Think about all those who had just been under paganism and were always running for their life, and the clergy who were always in danger. "And strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives even unto death." Well, that sounds like the right words. It's a misunderstanding about what it's being applied to, because it is now the religious, the ecclesiastical system thinking that God has done what he was going to do. He's brought the kingdom of God. "Therefore rejoice ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knows that he hath but a short time." In other words, paganism is a doomed cause. It was ending. It was coming to the end of its cycle, so to speak, of ruling. Now, I want to read you something personally. It's from the book, A Revelation, Which Interpretation, by Graham Pierce. And it was just a little too much to put into slides. But it has to do with this man who was present when Constantine came into full power of the Roman Empire. He was a bishop of Caesarea, and some of his words are recorded. And it was on the fall of Licinius. Maximinus had already gone down, now Licinius was down, and it was all Constantine. And these are his actual words, recorded at 260. He lived between 260 and 340. On the fall of Licinius, says Eusebius, the great conqueror Constantine and his son Crispus, the Caesar, received the East as theirs, established one government as formerly over the Romans, and swayed the whole piece from east to west and from north to south. The people, therefore, being freed from all the fear of the court by which they had before been overwhelmed, held festival days of great splendor. There were illuminations everywhere. They who were before dejected looked on one another with joyful aspects and smiles, and with choirs and hymns through the cities and country gave honor first to God and the supreme ruler of all, as they were taught, and then to the pious emperor and his children. The miseries and impiety of the past were forgotten. Joy and exultation prevailed at the blessings now promised, and happy anticipations of the future. Philanthropic edicts were everywhere published by the emperor, and laws that displayed his fierceness and piety. The event surpassed all words. He's explaining it. He was there. He's writing down what he saw. Soldiers with naked swords kept watch around the palace gate, but the men of God passed through the midst of them without fear and entered the heart of the palace. And they sat down, some at the emperor's table, the rest at tables on either side of his. It looked like here we go. This is the key thing that he said. And this was written for our learning. This was put into history for us. It looked like the very image of the kingdom of Christ, and was altogether more like a dream than a reality. Now, this was the man who was there. This is recorded history of the splendor that he was enjoying, and it would be very easy to sway the common public, people who would follow under you, that the kingdom of God had come. Because he was overwhelmed by it, of how everything changed to where men could walk past the soldiers and walk into the palace and sit at the table with Constantine. What a change from just a few years ago, where they feared for their lives. Now, this was the other thing that I found a little while later. This was Constantine's thought on it. These are literally his words to this man that I just read his words to Eusebius. He said this. Now, listen to these words. It took me several times of reading this before I really realized the importance of what he said in his words. Now, Constantine said, "But now that liberty is restored, and that dragon," he referred to paganism personally as a dragon. Tell me if that wasn't a guidepost through time written for us. Driven from heaven? No, the administration of public affairs. He didn't fall out of the heavens. He says he fell from the administration of public affairs. That's an office that you hold here on earth. Think about that. By the providence of the supreme deity and our instrumentality, we trust that all can see the efficacy or the effectiveness of the divine power. Constantine called paganism a dragon and simply said they were kicked out of office and now I rule. Now, if that doesn't explain a lot of this, you can't get any closer than this is the horse's mouth, so to speak. It's an amazing little piece of history that I believe God has allowed to be preserved from so long ago that we have this. about this time. Okay. I get really excited about things like that God has given us these things. Verse 13, and when the dragon, paganism, saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. Now, again, we have a separation taken. Paganism is collapsing, so this dragon is going through a morphing. The woman is going through a morphing at this time. And this is very important that you see that it's kind of fuzzy to see as they separate and all, because the dragon, this beast appears to become something different as we go on. The woman or the church contained two elements. It contained the bride of Christ and the seeds of the mother of harlots. And that is what's taking place right now. From here, we start to see the separation of these two components of the woman. That is what is happening. And then you can see how the kingdom of God is confused in it and everything. So you would get right on board with whatever Constantine is doing, while those who had the wisdom to see that it wasn't would have to separate themselves for fear of death. But I remind you that centuries are passing. This isn't something that happened at a festival at Constantine's table. It was a big part of it. It's one of the highlights of it. But it's only part of the journey. So what does it say? We start to get an image of something happening here now. And I thought this artist did a very good job with this. It says, and to the woman, and I would suggest to you the woman that is still the virgin woman, were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, unto her place where she is nourished for a time and times and half a time from the face of the serpent. Now, this times, and half a time, I don't want to get into another trying to explain what all these are, but I would suggest to you it's a reference to the 1260 days. It's another way that it's put. For the sake of time, I wanted to move along and not get burdened with another explanation of time. But look at it on your own at some time, and you can possibly draw that same conclusion from those who have studied it before. All right, so she's flying into wilderness. All right, so why the wings of an eagle? All right, here we have another component that has suddenly been brought into. She wasn't given the wings of a vulture or a robin or a cardinal, but the wings of an eagle. So it must possibly mean something. And I will give you the best suggestion I have to it, because, it really doesn't explain the wings. But these wings of an eagle were a very common symbol at this time when this is happening. We're going to look at that, and it's right here. The eagle was the symbol of Rome. So she has these Roman, does she have some kind of tie to Rome or something like that? I'm going to suggest to you not, but I will suggest this from what I've learned. This is the symbol of Rome, the Roman legion eagle. And it is a very common thing. Here's a stone cutting of a woman feeding a huge eagle. This is Roman. It's a symbol that's common. They saw it all the time. This one is probably very familiar to people who watch the old Roman movies, SPQR. I had to look what I always wonder what that means, the Senate and the people of Rome. But they use the Roman, this eagle, this golden eagle. Here, as their legions are marching, these are standards that went before them. So what does that mean? Why would this woman have these things? I'm going to get to that in a minute. I'm going to throw something else out there to you that I kind of stumbled onto, and I found it very, very compelling. This is another military standard of Rome. It's called the Draco the Dragon. And they have literally found these. And I would suggest to you that this is another guidepost through time. I believe it was one of the characters in the Harry Potter series was called Draco. Is that correct? And he was an evil one. Remember, he was the bad one. They called him Draco. And I thought, that just jumped right out at me. Draco. Okay, that's probably why they called him that, because he was like a dragon. He was evil. This was a Roman standard. Now, we're going to get back to the wings in a minute, but there's another thing I want to look at here. This was a Roman standard that they would literally have found. And it was called the Draco. The Draco was adopted first into the Roman cavalry during the 2nd century A.D., possibly with the introduction of Samaritan cavalry into the Roman army. Now, the 2nd century is just the very next century after John's death, because John possibly lived just into the 100s. We don't know for sure, but a century later, and what is that? Things which must shortly come to pass. All of a sudden, the dragon becomes a standard that goes before them in war. And here's a literal one that they found. This is a literal one of these standards that they would put on a pole and go before them. And Draco is the Latin word for dragon. I find that really compelling. Here's another one. The Draco first appeared on Trajan's column in Rome, a monument that depicts the Dracian Wars of 101 and 102 AD and 105 to 106 AD. And so I looked that up. I was kind of curious about it. And here is Trajan's column. And it was kind of one of those things, where's Draco? You've heard of where's Waldo, and you got to find him and all the mess. And I had looked for a long time before I found it. But he's right there. There's the little Draco in his army and fighting and conquering. There's that Draco dragon that went before them. It's used, a lot of times in movies and reenactments and things like that. I didn't realize how well known it was. It was quite a learning experience. So anyway, here we have the wings of the Roman. The woman is wearing these eagle wings. And we have this Draco dragon, which fits again. During this 1260-year period, the dragon of pagan Rome, I want to suggest to you, morphs into the dragon of Christian Rome. The church takes on those attributes of that dragon. The bride of Christ has never ruled in the heavens. Never ruled in the heavens. But this appeared as a great wonder in heaven. The woman was clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. But the bride of Christ has never ruled. That day has been preserved for us in the future. If I don't have it, I might have missed it. Maybe I went over it too fast. The wings represented, and I'm probably going to come up on it later and have to say it again, but represented the complete extent of the Roman Empire where she fled to. The whole, the Donatists went down into Africa, which was still under Rome, but they fled that way. And the wings just represented that she spread herself out to get away from all of those things. Moving on, in 15 it says, "And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away in the flood." So we see in our imagery, John is seeing this fountain of water just spewing out of the dragon's mouth and chasing the woman wherever she went. Even though the woman fled into the wilderness, she was still pursued for centuries by the dragon. It was a safer place. They didn't get annihilated, but there was constantly, as I would suggest to you, as the church is morphing into the characteristics of the dragon, they're constantly trying to get them. And we know, like we saw with the two witnesses and the massacre of St. Bartholomew, how they went after him like the dragon. But here's the interesting thing. What did it said this. I thought this was rather intriguing. "And the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood, which the dragon cast out of his mouth." So what John saw, I don't know. This is the closest thing I could come up to. It's like the earth is opened up and it's just swallowing up all the water. So what would that possibly mean? This was the safer place, I would suggest to you, that she fled to. The water represents the military campaigns against the true worshipers to stamp them out and to drown them, so to speak. Look what it says, and we get an idea of that language in Jeremiah 46:8. It says, Egypt rises up like a flood, and his waters are moved like the rivers. And he says, I will go up, and I will cover the earth, and I will destroy the city and the inhabitants thereof. So there's that same language of being like a flood to chase their enemies and destroy them. I would suggest to you the earth helping the woman would be those who took up arms in defense of political and religious liberty. And remember the two witnesses. That was the earth in general, the general populations who were constantly there doing the fighting that the brothers and sisters in Christ could not take a part in. And in some way were defended by that. We find something like this concerning Jehoiakim. I don't know if it's a good thing, but I thought it was interesting. Jehoiakim, of course, he was one of the last kings, and his posterity was not going to continue because of his evilness. And it said in Jeremiah, O earth, 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 hear the word of the Lord. The inhabitants of the earth were to record that none of his posterity was to sit on the throne. Now, who do you think he's talking? He's not talking to the ground, oh, earth, earth, earth. He's talking to all the inhabitants who will see and record this thing of Jehoiakim. And they're to record it and be aware of it. I just suggest to you that the earth represents the populations of the earth, not so much the governments of the earth, if that says it clear enough. Now the false Christian Roman dragon is making war with the woman as time goes on. This didn't happen all when this thing appeared. This is going through history. There's a lot of the history we've already looked at. In verse 17, then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring. Those would be through time, not just go after some individuals who are out on this ground. This is through time. Those who were the offspring of this woman that he's referring to, those who keep God's commandments and hold fast their testimony about Jesus. This is the true virgin, the woman, the true woman, the bride of Christ that he's going after. Not the one that's sitting back in Constantinople at Constantine's dinner table. It's not the same one. This is where the separation has taken place. The targeted group has now changed from going after Constantine to those who keep God's commands. Remember, before the dragon was going after Constantine. Now, just in a nutshell, this woman who has fornicated herself with the system is now taking on the attributes of the paganistic dragon and going after the true Church of Christ. That I suggest to you that's what's happening here. But you may have to look at that and read it a few times before you see it with clarity. I think we're finished just on time. By this time, the things that I just talked about the flood and the earth opening her mouth, Constantine has long passed away. He's the dust of the earth. He's gone. Many centuries have passed by the time these things happen and we get up to the witness period and all. But it is an ongoing process that is constantly growing. So we're going to have a closing slide about next week. Is there any questions or anything anybody like to contribute? I know it's a lot to absorb. It's a lot of history, and some of it may be even new to you, to where I got to think about that one. Anybody? Okay. Well, next week, we're right on an hour. We're going to start into chapter 13, and we bring in a new creature. Here we have the dragon, but this beast of the sea comes into the picture. We have another whole creature, and it has some same characteristics. It has 10 horns, and it has 7 crowns, and it has 7 heads. The dragon had the same. But yet this time the difference is, we'll look at it, the crowns are not on the heads, they're on the horns. Something's happened. We're at a different place of time than where the dragon originally started. We're moving through history about how this thing is morphing into these different creatures and taking on these attributes. So that's where we'll pick up next week. And I'll say goodnight there, and may God be with you all, and I look forward to speaking to you again. So good night.